challenging. So, I mean, this is a great exercise, and I think if everyone just could utilize some simple tools, it would be a wonderful process for them.
It's also a great tool if you really are trying to sort of just block out a little bit of time, I mean, really a half an hour where you turn out the lights, you light a candle, and you're just sitting with the darkness. And what's almost inevitably going to arise is some anxiety because things that we've been out running with our constant activity, flipping on the television, whatever it is, are likely to come up. So one of the ways of dealing with anxiety, I love Jungian James Hollis says, one of the tasks of growing up is that you have to be able to tolerate more anxiety, which is a hard sell. But what he's saying is, if you really stay with what is, there will be anxiety. That's part of a human life. And growing up is about not racing away from that. But then we have to learn to tolerate it. And one of the things I learned when I was leading ceremonies, particularly sweat lodge ceremonies, which sometimes can be stressful and intense for people, is to have them imagine that they were breathing in and out the soles of their feet. So, it's preferable if you can put your soles of the feet on the ground or the floor where you are. But even if you can't do that, you can still do it. And you literally just imagine that the life-sustaining oxygen is being breathed up through the soles of your feet and then being exhaled down through the soles of your feet. And generally it helps to imagine that with the earth, whether you're in a city or not, same earth always beneath us, right? And what's remarkable is that it seems almost impossible, and I've never seen it happen yet, to stay in a kind of state of rigid terror and do this simultaneously. Now, sometimes if we're really frightened, it will take a few tries to focus for the full extent of the inhale and the exhale. And for some reason, I think because the feet naturally bring us to ground, it has a bit more of a profound impact on fear than just following your breath in and out of your lungs. I mean, I've done that also, and sometimes that can be very calming. But if there's a real edge of anxiety, breathing in and out the soles of your feet, I'll tell you a really quick story. I loved the dark as a child. I am one of these people who finds it very difficult to sleep if the room is not blacked out. I mean, what we know is just as there are people who need more light on their skin or they have seasonal affective disorder, there are those of us on the other end of the scale who don't go into a very deep sleep if there's any light in the room. My son is like this, and so is my father. It's an inherited trait very similar to, but on the opposite end, of seasonal affective disorder. So I say that because as a child, when most kids are vying for night lights and things, I'm complaining to my mother that I can't sleep because I can see the light under the door and I want it blocked. So, and I love the dark. I spend an enormous time around in places that are dark, in ceremonies, in the sweat lodge. I like it so I can't tell if my eyes are open or closed, same with my bedroom. So all that's a background to say that on one particular night, December 27th, 2008, I went to bed out in the country, was alone in the house, and I was terrified for the first and only time in my life of the dark. Absolutely petrified. And I mean, it was such just not an experience I'd ever had. And I was trying to figure out, am I going crazy? Is this just me? And I called out to the grandmothers, who I often see in my dreams, these group of old women, and they said to me, breathe through the soles of your feet. Now, because I've used this a lot with other people, I was not happy with this. I said, I know what you're doing. Tell me what this is, And they just kept saying, breathe through the soles of your feet. And somewhat miraculously, really, because I was so frightened and I didn't know of what, I wouldn't have imagined I could fall asleep. As soon as I took 3 breaths in and out of the soles of my feet, I, in fact, fell asleep. And woke up the next day, and the first thing that came to my mind, partly in the dream and partly not, was the grandmother said, get out of here, meaning get out of this physical place, go into the city. And who knows? I mean, I have lots of thoughts now about what that might have meant. But so it's, the fear of the dark for lots of people is pretty primal. And I think part of them saying to me, get out of here, was that part of what I needed was connection. And I was in a very, very isolated place. And that I needed I did need to connect with other people. I think the hard part for us in this culture around this time of year is when we connect with other people, it's usually, it's kind of party mode. And what we really need in some ways is to sit with other people. Sitting, and it might just be with one other person, where we do sit in the dark and light one candle, or we just talk to someone, or we connect with them through email or something. And I say that because a lot of people who are often on my Facebook site have chronic illness, and so going somewhere to meet somebody is not possible. So we do need that connection. We need some kind of connection.
Right.
And if you're with other people and you practice the breathing through the soles of your feet, it's just so much easier to do.
Right. Right. And it also, it's amazing what the calming effect. I mean, it's almost instantaneous.
Yeah.
The part that I am really hearing a lot from people is how to maintain, or at least a peaceful place, because not only is the anxiety so high, but the worry thoughts and the fear thoughts, and it's almost as if this little ugly gremlin has taken over and, conjured up these fear thoughts in their mind, and so it's very difficult for them to get out of that thought processing. What do you suggest in regard to, okay, we're in the deep, we're in the dark, we're in the sludge, we're in the muck, and we're feeling it. And there may be a necessary crying bout we have to go through, or there may be a rebel yell we have to let out, or something to release it on a physical aspect from our voice. But is there something that we could suggest to the viewers, the listeners, that could help them in regard to stopping the crazy chatter, to maybe help them get a grip?
Well, sometimes, the chatter, the worry chatter, just is taking over our lives. And what we don't want to do is try and repress it and cut it off, because then where did it go? And it will come out in weird little ways, right? So then we'll blow our top at somebody in a store or something and think, where did that come from? And that's where it came from. So one of the things, especially when people are going through something, that really is worrisome. They've lost their job, or their marriage is falling apart, or someone is dying or has died. Like these, very real things that, in fact, raise all kinds of worries and concerns. One of the things I suggest is that they allocate some time for it. So they say to themselves, okay, from 3 to 4 in the afternoon, or on my lunch break, whatever it is, I'm going to commit to just really being with those thoughts and sitting with them. And when they come up in the rest of the day, to say, later, 3 o'clock, like you have an appointment with those thoughts. You're going to allow them some space, but you're not going to allow them to take over the whole day. For me, the easiest way to do this, just set aside some time and write them down. So during that hour, let's say, when I'm going to let myself really hear those voices, I write. And the advantage of that is sometimes I think the thoughts come up again and again because some part of us is almost afraid we're going to forget some reality we have to deal with. So writing them down can be helpful because it's like, no, I'm not going to forget them because there they are. They're in a nice little list over there.
Right, that's a great tool.
And so, limiting the time in the day, but giving it some time. Now, what usually happens when I do this, and I sit down for my time and I let it rip on the page, about, oh my gosh, what happens if, all that kind of thing, is that it actually comes out pretty quickly. In other words, it doesn't take the hour, and I can write it, and then I can just sort of sit with it and ask myself, what is it I'm really afraid of here? What's beneath that? Because there are usually very fundamental fears beneath those things, about being unlovable, about being alone, about, the world is a big and scary place and I am small, and again, not so much to get rid of them, but just to see where are those things. And sometimes they'll lead back right to a memory from childhood, and we'll see, That's the bell that fear is now ringing. That's the old bell that's ringing. And sometimes that doesn't happen. But most importantly is to kind of, the worst thing you could do, though, is to say, I'm going to do this, and then not do it. Because now your psyche's going, okay, I'm not buying that wait till 3 o'clock thing. I'm going to try and, worry about this all day long because you're not going to keep your commitment to let me have free reign for an hour. So if you've promised it to yourself, you really need to give it to yourself. You need to set that time aside and let it go. And I would suggest not just before you go to bed, or not just for, you can do it sometimes first thing in the morning, but it's kind of nice if it's in the middle of the day where, there's a way to sort of do it, contain it, and then move into some other aspect of your life. Right, because there's a part of us that once we make a commitment to ourselves to do something, and then say we let it slack or we let it slide, then there's that self beat up that we do to ourselves, and that's never fun because who's worse to us ourselves than ourselves? I mean, honestly, I don't think anyone is a worse critic than ourselves to ourselves. So, that really allows. That's a wonderful, wonderful tool you just provided the audience, and that is something that they can really use. And basically, it's something that it comes from their heart and their soul. So it's not something somebody can teach you to do. It has to come from your own inner voice and your own stuff. Yeah. But in getting it out on paper, it also, sometimes you can look at it and it doesn't look as scary as it does when it's kind of milling around in your head, And one of the things I'll sometimes do with this is the poem, The Invitation, that starts, It Doesn't Interest Me What You Do for a Living, was based on a writing exercise given by David White, who had written a poem that started off, It doesn't interest me if there's one God or many gods. So I will sometimes use that format with this. So if I've written down a fear about economics, let's say, I'm worried about how I'm going to have enough money or whatnot, then I will play with it. And this does become play, believe it or not, with it doesn't interest me if I have enough money or not, what I really want, and see what comes. And that's one way of sort of taking it deeper. Maybe what I really want is just not to know I'm alone with the challenges in front of me. Or what I really want is to know my sons will be okay. Or, so it's not to get definitive answers, and it's not to go into denial about what we are worried about, but it's to see, is there something underneath this? Right, because there always is. Yeah. There's always something. It's layered, Yeah. Well, that in regard to coming into the light. Now, as we're moving through this dark side of ourselves, and we know in our consciousness that the light is there a way that in writing it down and breathing through the soles of our feet and really honoring our pain, that we can just kind of have more of a selfish time for ourselves and maybe recognize that this may be a time where we do need to be, focusing upon ourselves and not outside of ourselves for others, which this season does call for. This season is the call of giving to others. And sometimes if we haven't given, all the time, if we haven't given to ourselves and we haven't taken care of us, there's no giving to others. So it's real important to, kind of develop a healthy selfishness in regard to loving ourselves and honoring ourselves. Yes, and taking that time. That self-care, that really deep self-care, and trying to find a moment to even know what that would look like for you. What would real self-care look like? And it can be very simple. At a certain point in my life, because of chronic fatigue, it meant buying a pre-stuffed turkey. Oh, there we go. That's great, and not feeling guilty about it. Exactly. It's making life simpler. So, it's different for everyone, and I think about particularly all the millions of women who spend the majority of a day or days in the kitchen, and is there anything more wonderful than the day after when all those leftovers are there? And you don't have to do anything. That's right. So,
That's right.
I had a friend once. I actually have a couple of friends who